all-member Poverty and Homelessness Board meeting. My name is Sean Murphy, and I'm the chair. Before we do the agenda review and public comment, I want to throw something out to the members as we're looking at the consent agenda. So in the executive meeting, we came up with, we have some things on the agenda that normally we'd like to have more opportunity to talk about, because we're going to do the severe weather response is on the agenda today, and the system design clinic, and they don't have a lot of time. So we wanted to throw out some alternatives for you guys to think about, and then somebody can make a motion if they want to change the consent agenda. So one of the things is that we could move the committee updates to November. We do, 2 of the chairs are out, so we might not need all 10 of those minutes, and we can add those minutes to one of the other topics. The other piece is that we could move to have an all-member meeting in November, since normally we don't meet in December because the meeting's close to the holiday. And we can have Josh come back on the system design clinic debrief, and we could spend the majority of the November meeting talking about that and reviewing that with him. So, which he can still get started today.
Oh, okay.
But in addition to that, we could have a November meeting where we're all together to finish that discussion, so we don't move it into, because then we would be into January before we could bring it back.
You're looking for a motion that we do 2 things: move the committee updates to a memo or to November, and have an all-member meeting in November.
Yes.
Okay.
If we move that, then we could give Tim more time to talk about the severe weather response.
I'm happy to make that motion.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess we're going to do it right now. So let's do that. All right. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Motion passes. Okay. So we are going to open it up for public comment. And Carly, do we have anybody for public comment this afternoon? No. Anyone here? No? All right. Okay. Since we don't have anybody for public comment, we will move up. And so now I do believe we need a motion to approve the consent agenda with the 2 changes that Mayor Venus and Maggie added to the agenda.
I move we approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. Can I get a
I'll second it.
second? All right, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. Thank you, everyone. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Amanda.
Chair, may I just have a brief moment? We have a student from the University of Oregon here today who is writing a story for the journalism class, and just to let you know that all of our proceedings are online. This is being televised, and if you see the gold stars on some of the name tags, those are voting members of this committee. Others are either staff or what do we call it?
Non-voting?
No, ex officio. Thank you.
Okay. I think Carly's going to pull up my slides. Just to do a quick introduction, I'm Amanda Board. I'm a Senior Program Services Coordinator with Lane County, and I am our primary lead staff for our continuum of care. All right. That's a good one, thanks. So today I'm coming to you for our sort of final approval of our continuum of care application. So we'll be looking for action on 2 items today. One is the final ranking or priority listing, as it's referred to, as well as our overall consolidated application for continuum of care funds. So you can choose to approve these separately or together. I think typically the group approves them together at the end. So if that's the preference, we can do that, or I'll pause after I go through the priority listing and we can have discussion on that if there are questions as well. Next slide. So our consolidated application consists of those two parts. When we submit this to HUD, we submit a priority listing, which actually includes all of our project applications for the individual projects that are funded with Continuum of Care funds. So that includes our renewal listing of our existing projects, our new project listing of the ones that we are submitting for potential funding this year, as well as planning, our youth homelessness demonstration program, or YHDP renewals, as well as any reallocation. And so all of those are sort of brought together into those listings and submitted to HUD first. And then we also, at the same time, submit our COC application. And that includes really all of the broader narrative. I believe you all received it in your packet. It's 180-something pages. We did not print it today. But if you would like a printed version for your bookshelf, I'm happy to make you one. But that is our sort of bigger narrative portion that we submit that kind of describes all of our strategies, the work that we're doing as a continuum, how we're structured with our governance, what our partnerships, all of that information that I'll go through today and sort of the highlights of that content. And so we will be submitting that portion as well as attachments that are included in that. So for, just to go through some highlights of our priority listings for our youth homelessness demonstration program, those are awarded non-competitively. That's a separate pot of money that gets renewed through our continuum of care now that they are finishing their first sort of initial grant period. And so 5 projects will be renewing, 2 of which we extended into 2025, so they will be renewing for the first time. The others, this is their second round of renewal. So again, those are not going to be ranked, and so those are just awarded as long as they meet the threshold. For now, they will eventually be ranked after, I don't know what period of time. Our planning grant is also submitted. This is also a new project, considered new and not ranked. It's not competitive. We're simply eligible to apply for a certain percentage of our annual renewal demand, which they increased to 5% last year. And because it's a percentage, it increased as well because of our increase of the awards we got last year and the YHDP awards. And so it will just continue to grow based on that percentage. So we will submit that one. That one primarily supports staffing, including my position and others at the county that do the work of the continuum, as well as our lived experience stipends come from that fund as well. Next slide. So HUD encourages continuums of care to sort of look at their project inventory every year and analyze whether you want to reallocate any projects, whether in portion or in full. And so we do get additional points if we reallocate cumulatively 20% over the last several years. We have not reached that mark. And really HUD encourages you just to do reallocation if it's appropriate. So we certainly don't want to reallocate 20% just because we want to get the points. It should be based on what is appropriate for your continuum. So we have done a small amount of reallocation, but not to meet that full threshold. I think that we would have to reallocate, I think, several $100,000 more to meet that. And so the COC committee has done the work of reviewing that policy and sort of accepting those changes and moving that money to other projects, and we can talk about that in just a moment, but that will be in the priority listing as well. So no projects were specifically recommended for reallocation this year. We are working with some of our lower scoring projects on technical assistance right now to improve performance and spend down, and we're really feeling like we want to give that extra time to make sure they can make those improvements. And so we didn't feel like this year was appropriate to reallocate. We did do some reallocation last year, if you remember, for several projects. So this year we're sort of seeing how things go, and we'll revisit again next year to look for improvements. However, St. Vincent de Paul did opt to not renew one of their continuing projects, which is the Vet Lift project. That one is 18 units of permanent supportive housing to serve chronically homeless households. So that was just a voluntary reallocation of that project. They were just simply looking at sort of their broader continuum of veteran programs that they operate, and this one had been operating for a long time, and they felt like it was no longer sort of fitting in with that bigger picture. As far as I understand, those units will continue to serve veterans, but they will simply be filled through their own affordable housing side of things, not through like our central wait list. So Some folks in that program will continue to be living at that location, and some may need to move on, and if so, we will work with the agency to do that transition. So they've fully committed to making sure everyone remains housed through that process, and they're still in the middle of their renewal, so it's not ending today or immediately. Questions about that? Okay. Next slide. So in looking at our new projects, I've already kind of talked about the highlights of these at previous meetings, so I won't go into too much detail, but we will submit our new project listing, which includes any projects that we are submitting for our continuum of care bonus amount, which is a set percentage we're eligible to apply for, as well as any funds that are available through reallocation process. And so there will be 2 projects submitted in the amount of $252,453, and that is the amount that was reallocated from the vet lift project. So the COC committee approved an expansion of Connections Rapid Rehousing for additional services. So that will not add units, it will simply be additional service money in $40,000, and then the Homeless Management Information System will have an expansion submitted that could be funding additional training support as well as additional license support for our homeless management information system. And that was just prioritized. That project has not had an increase in quite some time. We've not submitted an expansion in quite a while and does not receive a regular annual increase either. And so they just felt like that was a good place to put that. The other projects are through our bonus opportunity. Thanks. The other projects are through our bonus opportunity, which increased this year, so we had an unexpected larger amount than we typically would have under the COC competition, and so the COC committee was able to sort of allocate that to a couple of different projects. One is to expand our coordinated entry support through our continuum of care. We typically support coordinated entry through other local funds and state funding, sort of a mixture of funding at Lane County. So we have not had a COC grant specifically for coordinated entry. And so we're hoping that that would be awarded. We have submitted it in the past and it was not awarded, but many, or if not most, do have a coordinated entry supportive services only grant to support that work, similar to the HMIS grant because it's required of the COC. So the other one was for the remaining units at Bridges on Broadway, which if you remember, the COC funded 25 of those units in the last fiscal year competition, which was awarded. And so this is to support the remaining 32 units that will be in that building once completed. And last year it was just based on the amount available, was not enough to cover all the units. So hopefully this will be awarded to support the full building. And then our new domestic violence bonus project. That is a separate pot of money specifically to serve survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. We did issue an RFP, a request for proposals for that opportunity, and did not receive any proposals that were eligible to be funded. And so we do continue to do capacity building to ensure that we can kind of expand the housing resources available for that population. But because we didn't have an application to submit, the committee approved submitting a coordinated entry supportive services only project, and that's an expansion of what was funded last year to sort of provide additional coordinated entry access, front door assessor, as well as someone who is sort of a liaison to coordinate navigation for survivors with our victim service providers, with Lane County, and with other partners. Let's see. Next. So I included additional detail here on exactly what those new projects are funding, but since we already have covered this in some previous meetings, I don't need to go through. You can go to next slide. Next one, where the chart. So these are our renewal projects. So the remaining projects are all of our existing projects that are funded through the continuum of care, and we're just about at the point where it's not fitting on one page. So we're definitely increasing each year the amount of funding we have for our continuum, and that's great. These are mostly our permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing projects that will be submitted. slide. So for our priority listing or ranking, we are required by HUD to rank all of our projects in 2 tiers. Tier 1 is considered safe for funding and will be funded if all meets sort of their minimum thresholds, and then Tier 2 would be considered at risk. We do have an increased Tier 2 this year, so it's 90% falls into Tier 1, I think, and so 10% would fall into the bottom. It's typically a little bit less than that. So more projects did fall into Tier 2 this year. So it was a good discussion at the COC committee in terms of figuring out how we were going to rank projects. We also had a number of other factors this year to consider because we had the reallocated projects, we have the new bonus projects. We also have projects that were funded last year that haven't started yet. So sort of where to place all of those and prioritize with our renewals was a good discussion. And so you have that ranking in your packet. It's probably hard to see in your packet, but easier to see on the screen. If we need to pull it up, we can. But they essentially decided to rank the projects from renewal HMIS project. Those capacity ones typically have fallen at the top of our ranking simply because they're not evaluated the same as housing projects are. Followed by our new PSH projects, the ones that were funded in the previous fiscal year that have not yet started, so we don't currently have performance data on them yet. Followed by our renewals by performance, and that was just based on this year's evaluation scores. Following that was our DV coordinated entry SSO that was renewing from last year. Followed by those reallocation projects, and they prioritized based on housing for these, same as the bonus projects. Following that one, prioritizing, I think, Bridges on Broadway above coordinated entry. And then lastly, our DV bonus project for this year. And so that is the priority listing and ranking that will be submitted with our COC application. And again, Tier 2 is at risk, but last year we did get our full ask of our request, and so it really depends on how competitive our COC score is and the various scoring that they do to prioritize our projects. So a lot of factors go into what will be funded, and we certainly can't predict, but it certainly doesn't mean that all of those projects in Tier 2 will not be funded or anything like that. Questions about that portion? Next slide. Before I head into the COC application side, and we can certainly vote to approve that portion first too, but usually we wait till the end. Any preference, questions? Okay. So I'll just give some highlights from our COC application, that long document that you had in your packet. Certainly not going to go through the whole thing. Really similar to previous years. There are always a few questions that are adjusted or changed or added from year to year, but it's not usually largely different from previous years. This year, the thing to remember is that we are doing a fiscal year 24 and 25 competition, so we're on a 2-year COC cycle for the first time this year, hoping to continue that so that we won't have to complete that narrative portion next year. And that was just based on feedback to HUD that it takes a considerable amount of time to do that, and it pretty much starts all over again right after we finish it for the next year. And so that time is better spent doing the actual work of ending homelessness. And so a lot of it doesn't change from year to year. And so we're glad they heard that feedback. And so the consolidated application piece will move forward through 2025 as well. And so important to remember, we will have some decisions to make around projects next year, but just not the narrative portion. So some strengths and challenges. A lot of these remain the same as previous years as well. We do continue to have broad involvement from a lot of stakeholders and representation in our COC, which is a priority of the continuum to really have everyone at the table who needs to be. We continue to coordinate really well with our Public Housing Authority, and leveraging our voucher programs continues with projects like Bridges on Broadway. We've continued to do a lot of improvement around coordinated entry, case conferencing, street outreach. Year after year, we're just continuing to improve those processes. Our data completeness and quality remain strong, so our HMIS is pretty robust and includes a lot of programs and is pretty comprehensive, which is not true in a lot of continuums. We do have really good data. Our policies and procedures for our continuum continue to improve and continue to be formalized, like with our evaluation, our standards, and we're going to be continuing to do that work, but that was certainly better than even just a few years ago. We've really started to formalize a lot of the ways that we make decisions within the continuum of care and how we rate our projects. And then I will say that our system performance strategies do remain as a strength for me. I think we do have a lot of really great strategies, and especially over the last few years, I would say since 2018 and the TAC report, if some remember, that we've really started to incorporate a lot of best practices, really look nationally at what folks are doing, and incorporate some of those new and different strategies to see what works. And I think what we need to continue doing is just evaluating, right, what is working, what's not working, and be able to pivot quickly to things that do work. And I'll talk more about our system performance in a minute. Some of the challenges or things that we could see improvement on as far as our COC application goes, increasing and broadening participation of our people of lived experience in all aspects of our continuum. So we certainly have the work of League, who is a fantastic group of individuals, and we love them. A couple of them are here today. But we want to, expand that to all tables at our COC, so making sure there's active participation at all of our committees. But beyond that, I think just making sure we have ways to get feedback directly from people who are living it right now in shelters and on the streets, and making sure we have more formalized processes to do that. I think we're able to speak to some level of that of surveying or focus groups, but we don't necessarily do that in any formal way or any intentional way in every aspect of the work that we're doing. So making sure that folks with lived experience are really part of that decision making. Racial equity action steps and measurable goal setting. We've done some work to do a racial disparities analysis. We do that annually, and we've certainly taken some steps, especially with coordinated entry, in recognizing that there were disparities happening and inequities that were taking place because of that assessment. So we improved that and implemented a new assessment, and we're continuing to evaluate. But overall, across the continuum, we sort of need to do that same process outside of just that, but looking at all of our policies, procedures, our standards, and the decisions we make with an equity lens, and making sure we're doing that at every step. Training provided by the COC. We do provide some regular training, but I think this is really just a challenge that continues with capacity to make sure that staff are trained at agencies, that we have consistent standards around training, and that everyone has the training they need to understand the requirements of the COC program and just all of the things that they need to know. And it's difficult, with staff turnover at agencies to make sure that's up to date, that we're offering those regularly enough to keep up with that as well. So hoping in the future we did just do some surveying around what training needs are, and we have some funds dedicated to that. So we're really hoping to formalize some of that training this year, especially too. Coordination and implementation of DV services and access. I think we all know and have talked about at this table that that's really an area that we need improvement on in our continuum in our community. We just don't have enough domestic violence services or resources available, and our systems are not set up to really make sure that those needs are met in the moment. And so certainly the coordinated entry grants that we are receiving can do a part of that with navigation and access. But once they get there, we need to make sure we also have the resources on the other side of it and the housing that is specific to survivors that really specifically meets their needs, and make sure we have capacity in our agencies to serve that population and have that expertise. So a work in progress, but definitely a noticed area of improvement. And then increasing formal partnerships. We do have a lot of partnerships, but I think this just speaks to some of them. We don't have an MOU or a formal agreement, but we have a lot of informal partnerships. So really making sure we're formalizing some of those so that they can continue and grow. And then I'll talk about performance quickly in a moment. How am I on time? Am I going over? Okay. So the bulk of our narrative you'll see, or the portion that I think is really important to review, if you can't review the whole document, is to really make sure you're looking at those system performance questions. And that really speaks to all of these system performance measures that we're required to report on, and is a big part of our COC score and determining whether, we're getting additional funding for additional projects to serve the population. And so this is really where we talk about all the work that we're putting into place to improve on our outcomes. And so for each one of these, I can go through some of the strategies that we implement locally. And I think the important thing to remember too, just as we are in the strategic planning process, really thinking through that, all of the strategies that we want to outline, making sure those connect in some way to improving on these system performance measures, I think will be important to keep in mind. Next slide. So reduction in first-time homeless risk factors. We have done a community needs assessment where we identified some at-risk populations that we've targeted assistance to. We do still continue to have a really high number of newly homeless, or sort of those folks who are first time on our homeless by name list. And that looks at typically over 400 individuals a month, and over the year, a pretty large amount. And so this is an area we definitely need to see some improvement on our inflow and putting in strategies that will specifically target reducing that inflow into our system. Maggie?
I noticed a big increase in senior homelessness down in Florence. And I'm wondering if you've done any research in.
Yeah, so older adult homelessness is a topic nationwide that's being looked at. In Lane County, we're actually specifically talking about that population as well and making that a priority. And so I don't necessarily have I don't know if, James, you have anything to add on the work that is started there, but.
Yeah, there's conversations happening within Health and Human Services about services that we can provide for those folks. We've talked, about diversion strategies specifically aimed at ensuring that folks 65 and older don't lose housing and then become homeless. So we're talking about strategies and approaches, but it's definitely at the top, one of the top priorities, I think, in the upcoming year when we're looking at target populations to serve.
It's just really visible in Florence.
Yeah, I believe it.
And I believe in our data, we are seeing too that over 55 even, that number is increasing. And we saw that in our point in time count, yeah. So increasing eviction prevention, increasing diversion efforts. But on top of that with, those older adults, folks on fixed incomes, we'll need additional strategies around vouchers or permanent subsidies, permanent affordable housing, that folks will be able to afford. It might not just be a one-time prevention, but ongoing folks might need support with affordable housing, length of time homeless or strategy to reduce that. Our average actually has continued to decrease, which is great. We have implemented some really specific strategies around this metric, primarily prioritizing in the past our CWL, our central wait list around length of time homeless. We have staff positions that are designated to sort of expedite moving folks to housing from our central wait list to kind of get all of the documents ready, making sure that time from referral to housing is shortened, as well as the diversion resources that we've continued to expand so that when folks enter homelessness, we're getting them into a placement, whether that's temporary or permanent, right away. And yeah, we have some other continued strategies that you can read about there. But again, the lack of units is going to continue to remain a challenge in getting folks into a placement quickly. Exits to permanent housing and retention. Our exits remain fairly low. This is another topic that's a priority for the next year to look at. And I think something that came out of the system design clinic data as well. Our exit number is just very low. So I think at our internal meetings, even starting next week, we're starting to look at the data, figure out where are these folks going, who's exiting, and why aren't they exiting to permanent destinations. And so I think it starts with that data-informed approach of figuring out what's happening there, and then figuring out ways that we can strategize around how to improve that outcome, because it actually continues to decrease as well. So it's down an additional 3%. And overall, we really want folks to be exiting to permanent housing, right? So tight rental market and low vacancy rates. I know everyone understands that, but we've implemented coordinated landlord engagement strategies, diversion strategies. We've continued to develop additional PSH. What is still needed, again, that data analysis, case conferencing around exits, and a lot more around tenancy supports and eviction prevention. So once folks are in programs, right, we want to make sure they're not exiting to a non-permanent location, and we're really doing everything we can before that exit happens, and that we've taken all those steps possible. So really mitigating those issues with landlords to prevent that additional return to homelessness.
Can I just a question, as you look at that, will you look at program by program? And there might be some best practices within some programs so even if the overall is low, some might be doing better than others?
Yeah, so I think that's where that data analysis comes in. These metrics pull in a variety of different program types, so whether they're COC funded or not, so it's really looking at our whole system. So I think drilling down now, because we know that bigger number, but we want to see what's bringing that number down. Certain projects have higher percentages of exits and certain have lower, and so we need to figure out how we're making sure that all of those programs have a high percentage. Go ahead.
Lucy, the question you had, was it specifically regarding homelessness prevention or return to housing?
No, it was just looking at the low exits to permanent housing. If some programs are more successful than others, you'd want to look at that, right? Why are they having a better success rate? I just wanted to make sure that was sort of factored in.
And I'd like to underscore something that Amanda said, that we say all the time, that the lack of housing will continue to be a major factor.
Right, so if we're looking at shelter, right, the number is probably going to be fairly low, but there could be different strategies versus rapid rehousing if the exits are low. So we'll look at that data and figure out different strategies.
Just a reminder to make sure your mics are closed when you're talking.
Returns to homelessness. Let me think here. So we are continuing to identify system returns like through our broader HMIS data and seeing who is coming back into our system after they've already exited to permanent housing. And so I think this is something to improve upon in terms of making sure we're getting to folks before that happens, before they re-enter, and making sure we're being intentional about those strategies is something we haven't quite gotten to, identifying those folks proactively rather than once they're back in our system. But we have done some things around case conferencing, lateral transfers, and investments in prevention. But I think we just need to do more around tenancy supports and eviction prevention to stop it from getting there, right? Increasing employment, income strategies. We've actually done fairly well on that strategy. Sorry, Carly, next slide. But employment obviously remains a challenge for those with disabilities, criminal history, substance use, lack of skills, right, who have not been in the workforce. And so we continue to utilize WorkSource Lane and all of the resources they provide. We've started integrating and co-locating housing and employment within some of our programs, and that we'll have to just evaluate and see if that has improved some of our strategy there and improved our outcomes. And I think there's a lot of opportunity with the engagement of the Eugene Chamber of Commerce, so really figuring out how can we utilize those business owners and find partnerships, more of those formal partnerships, to make sure that those strategies are really contributing to improving our employment. Next slide. Non-employment cash income. So this looks at all of those other non-cash benefits or disability assistance as well. We did have some increase, and this continues to be nearly the same as the previous years, so not a total improvement, but consistent. We do continue to coordinate with DHS around TANF and use the SOAR model, but I think we can provide additional training beyond what we have and ensure that we're really finding more formal ways to connect folks to disability, finding expedited ways to do that, because as we know, it's a complicated process. And so just continued areas of improvement.
I'm glad you're using the SOAR model. I've taken that training, and it's really helpful.
Right, so we have, but I think we need to expand the number of dedicated SOAR case managers we have, find funding to support that, because it's often just another piece of someone's work. So finding folks that can really spend full time just getting folks connected to benefits is really the best practice. Okay. We made it through. So that's certainly the highlights, and it's a long document, but I encourage all of the PHP members to review it, especially in light of our strategic planning process and how do we take this and then take it to the next step forward, and it helps to get thinking at the bigger picture. So questions?
Thank you, Amanda. You are literally right on time. I had you
Oh,
down
look
at
at that.
12:35 and.
I felt like I was going way
12:36,
over.
so-
Okay.
And I just want to highlight the amount of work Amanda put into all of this. I mean, as is seen with the amount of paperwork that was included in the documents, it's a big lift. So thank you.
Any other questions or discussions before I ask for a motion? Amanda, you have silenced the crowd. Wow. Okay. Can I get a motion, please?
All right, I'll make a motion that we approve both the final ranking priority listing and the final draft and submission of the COC consolidated application.
Thank you, Maggie. Can I get a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. I'm gonna have to buy you 2 coffee.
Here's a button.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay, thank you. All right, that motion passes, and Tim, we're ready for you. The severe weather response presentation.
Actually, anywhere's fine. Wherever's comfortable for you. This seat would probably be best for looking at slides. Yeah.
Well, Madam Chair, I did not get a say in your vote to change your consent calendar to make me sit here longer in the hot seat, but I'm glad we have time. But I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to start with some fancy slides, and I already warned Carly that I'm going to move quickly through those, because I know that you all know that. I'm sorry, I'm Tim Black with St. Vincent de Paul, Emergency Response Coordinator, coordinate Egan Warming Center, and whatever else comes along, and we'll talk about that. So I think we all know St. Vincent de Paul is the largest human services nonprofit in the county. Humble beginnings in 1953. If anyone's ever been over to the main chat office and you go up the stairwell, there's a great timeline on the wall of major milestones. But Bethany reminded me yesterday that we've been so busy we kind of stopped in 2015. So we've got a lot of stuff to add, and this will be one of those dots along that wall, I have no doubt. But over the years, we help people in the community, and we try to help the planet while we're at it through innovation and recycling and services. Go ahead, Carly. Couple fiscal years ago, almost 52 million in, 52 million out. A big piece of that in is the stores. That's about 40% of the budget that helps us fund all the stuff we do in the community. And over on the right, big chunk of that is for payroll and employee costs, and about a quarter is what we spend locally on affordable housing and community services. Go ahead, Carly. And our employees it's approaching 700 folks at this point when this is done. So that's a lot of folks that we employ in the community. Go ahead, Carly. And what's nice is just how people think of St. Vinny's and St. Vincent de Paul. And I was taught this, that St. Vinny's means the stores, St. Vincent de Paul means all of our programs from what we do. And people know that. They shop locally, they get cool stuff, and they know that those dollars are going to be spent locally, providing direct local support. And then my world of that, over at the Lindholm Center in homeless, go ahead, Carly, homeless and shelter services. It includes the service station, the safe sleep sites, dawn to dawn, and I like saying dawn to dawn because as you all probably know, we've gone from dusk to dawn to dawn to dawn, and that is a big difference of when we actually have that additional funding to stay open during the day, which is more than just being open. It allows us to have case management and all sorts of things, so that's a big deal. Youth and family services, and then self-sufficiency programs like second chance renters, things like that. Go ahead, Carly. And then we'll get to my world, which I know best. And now my slides get a little unfancy. Those are the fancy ones I got from the folks at headquarters, and now these are mine that that we use for our volunteer orientations and things. And Commissioner Farr, I know you know this man. That's Thomas Egan. named Egan Warming Center, started in 2009, honoring and remembering Thomas Egan, who died in December of 2008 in a cold stretch where the temperatures dropped really quickly over a couple-day period, and he was found frozen at the end of Blair Boulevard in the Whitaker neighborhood. And citizens that don't like to take no for an answer had already been working on a shelter system, and this put the effort over the top. Lane County said, yes, we're going to help, and St. Vincent de Paul was chosen to be the structure under all of that. But today it's still predominantly volunteer run, and it's amazing what they do. What is it? It is our Springfield and Eugene's low barrier emergency winter shelter program. It's triggered by the temperatures. It's not perfect, but we can't open every night, and we know that. So we set it at 30 degrees or below 30 degrees, just because that gives us at least somewhat of an idea that we're not going to max out the volunteers and completely crash the program. We just can't open every single night, even though we wish we could. So we can get on to, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Carly. This just gives you an idea, and this shows the huge effect of COVID as well. You know, we opened based on the temperatures, but COVID really hit us in the terms of the volunteers we had available because so many of them are older, retired, it wasn't safe. But we never had to turn anybody away. You know, people did a good job of trying to shelter in place on their own, and that kind of led over into our shelters. We had enough volunteers to get by. We were able to consolidate more with larger spaces, like at the fairgrounds, places like that, so we could do what we do with fewer volunteers. It's not ideal when you get more and more people in one space, but we did it. And boy, 31 nights, that was a rough year. I haven't added last year this, but you know, I tell people that I think that ice storm made last year just about as tough, even though it was only 10 and a half nights, if you count what that crazy last night, compared to 31 nights, but that really was some significant challenges. And you just get a small idea of the volunteer enterprise, how many it takes, how many hours, what it takes to make all that work. Go ahead, Carly. So what's new? What's new, thank you, Lane County, is increased funding for severe weather. And so Egan Warming Center is now going to be part of this larger severe weather budget. What that means is that we can be more flexible, more timely in responding to whether it's wildfire smoke or the need for a cooling center in extreme summer temperatures. We've been responsive in the past when the county or others said, hey, we need help, can you do it? Well, now we have the additional funds to be able to say, okay, county, we're going to let you know that we're going to go ahead and open a cooling center, we're going to do it here, we're going to do that, or if we have other extreme weather needs. We have that flexibility now that we didn't have before. And it also is going to let us address some of these longer term goals. And you know, Bethany is cautioning me, don't keep saying so long term with these goals. We really want to get going on this year. We need some permanent shelter sites in Eugene and Springfield. It's important for our guests, for consistency, knowing where they can go, that it's always going to be there, for our volunteers, and of course, just because we can't count on year to year that we're going to have the same spaces we did. City of Springfield has been wonderful at letting us use the Memorial Building downtown. They've made it clear, this is it. This is our last winter because we've been expecting it every year. They have other plans. We understand that. So this is it. So we're going to need a Springfield home. The folks at Lane Event Center have been wonderful providing us space and being really flexible. We can't always count on that. The faith institutions that Egan has counted on over the years, that's becoming more of a challenge. The memberships are down, the congregations are getting older and fewer, and many of these places have closed. We just can't keep counting on it. So we're always in the search for new, better places. We need permanent homes that would help us for any of these emergencies that might come up. Even with Egan, that is still predominantly volunteer run, each year it's taken more and more additional staff support, especially for the overnights, to make that work. We just can't do it anymore with just volunteers. And especially now that we are promising to take on some more flexibility and opening for these other weather events, we are committed to hiring more staff to help with that, more training, better training for our staff, because it's not just getting harder, it's getting more dangerous, right? We always assumed at Egan that everybody who survives on the street may have a knife in their stuff. Well, keep it in your backpack, we're going to check that. Now we have to assume there's going to be guns everywhere. We just don't know. And that's a whole different thing for me, worrying about my volunteers. If they're carrying somebody's backpack and they drop it, that's a whole different thing than a gun. Those are things that keep me up at night, and we just try to stay ahead of those worries as best we can with training. But it doesn't change the bottom line that we're going to help people as best we can. Go ahead, Carly. So what it really means is that we can put out the welcome mat more often for when people in our community that need help, need that help. We can open those doors, and we can try to do it as close to Egan-like as we can, meaning low barrier. You're not going to be having to take a drug test when you come in. If you're high, you're drunk, come on in, just follow the rules, right? We all need to be safe, but we want you inside. Let's get inside. And that's going to let us do that more. Go ahead, Carly. The volunteers, this is, I just love this picture. This is the volunteer name tags from our Springfield site. You know, when they get there for their shift, they find their name tag, they stick it on, or they make a new one. You can see they're pretty fancy, so we can't afford to make new name tags for them when we want. It just takes so many, and they're all wonderful. It takes training. We do provide basic trauma-informed care and de-escalation training, but we need to up that. And I would like to say that even though we can't provide direct Egan support to our friends in Florence and Oak Ridge and places like that, we do what we can. And one of those little ways is to open our trainings, because they're often on Zoom, and our orientations to folks in those other communities. If they're putting together their own shelter systems, they have people on a list, they can participate in our trainings, ask the same questions, and we try to provide some assistance that way as best as we can. Go ahead, Carly. This is really important, of course, and you know, it's not just, here we are, we're the nice volunteers, you come on in, but you know, you're on that side of the table, we're on this side. We're really trying to just, you know, it's more about you're a neighbor, and I'm a neighbor trying to help you as a neighbor, because tonight you need help. Maybe next time I need help. But there's a level of dignity there that goes far beyond just, we're the volunteers, we're doing this good thing, come on in and have some soup. And that takes training, and go ahead, Carly. But trauma-informed care works the other way too. Our volunteers take on that trauma as well. Anybody in this business, and I don't have to tell you all, takes on that trauma. This is a picture of a gathering that we had. We have, you know, good friends across the community, including at Theo's and World Pies. We had a gathering for the volunteers who participated during the ice storm because of how traumatic that event was. We had no agenda other than come, be able to talk to other volunteers outside of the craziness of Egan, get to know each other, just hang out, share your stories, and it was really important. And this was all because of a volunteer. It was her idea. Hey, we should do that. I'm gonna make it happen. Great. And so now we actually try to do this after each activation, especially if it's a multiple day activation. That's really important. Go ahead, Carly. You know, it's not just us, and especially now with this expanded funding and the opportunity to provide more shelter support for cold weather, hot weather, smoke, you name it. Thank you for the funding, but we can't do it all on our own. It still is going to take everyone in this room and everyone not in this room, because everybody has a role to play. And, you know, Egan couldn't do it without the cities, without the county, without cahoots, without public, without fire and EMS and the police. You name it, right? Everybody has a slightly different niche that we play in the community, serving the folks that we serve. But we all have to come together when it's an emergency situation, and we need to do a better job of asking for help, and we're going to try to do that, and we know that folks are going to respond. Go ahead, Carly. And this is just really my last slide. This is just a picture from inside the memorial building at night, and I just love this because it just shows it's an emergency. It's cold, they're freezing, but we can try in that one night. We may only see this person one night, ever. A little bit of a sense of community. You're warm, you're safe, you're comfortable for at least that one night. And that's what we can try to do for all these other things as well. And, you know, and I'll just end with my, you know, because I never want to miss an opportunity on a soapbox, just to remind us that, you know, that we're all so frustrated by this issue, and it's such a global issue. And everybody takes all of that global angst and then expresses that angst locally, right? And we all have our own little fiefdoms and our things that we do, and we start fighting over all these little things. But boy, with the Venn diagram of all those things, there's a big, huge common circle in the middle that we're all in, that we love this community, and we want to fix this so that in 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're at a different place. Because, we are the de facto Lane County Alliance to end homelessness, or at least to greatly, reduce and mitigate homelessness. And I think that sometimes I think we miss opportunities to all be rowing in the same direction on that broader goal, so that we're not having these same conversations in 10 years or 20 years when my kids are sitting here at the table and not me. So I'm going to stop there to allow plenty of time for you to ask questions, or we can talk about whatever you'd like.
Thank you, Chair. Tim, I've been in and around admiring your work for so many years now. I think it's been a long time since you worked for the city of Eugene, but you've been in and around and at the forefront of a lot of the things that we do. You are the historian in many ways. You can provide us with a history of so many different things that we do in the community. This body right here, the Poverty and Homelessness Board, is a multi-jurisdictional body, and it's an opportunity for you to put forward some pretty specific asks about what can we do as the city of Eugene, the city of Springfield, Lane County, and the rural cities to help in your efforts. And one thing that you talked about today is we need to provide training, but we also need to provide facilities as close to Egan as possible. And earlier on in your presentation, you said that we need permanent shelter sites. So permanent shelter sites, I'm going to look at Mayor Vinnis right now, because under Mayor Vinnis's leadership for the last 8 years, we've added permanent shelter sites throughout this part of the metropolitan area. But at some point, maybe if you can do it briefly now, what does that look like? How many acres is it? How many? What's the location? Because we need to have everybody thinking about this, not unlike every one village, which provides a very unique sort of response. But if we can spread the word around that we need shelter sites, and people might say, "Hey, I have a place." So what does it look like?
Thank you. That's a great question. And we're not particularly picky. So people can picture one of the big rooms at the fairgrounds, right? Either Wheeler Pavilion or one of the halls, the holiday market, things like that. We bring everything in, right? We can put things out on the floor, the mats. We can bring in the food. We can bring in porta potties. We need heat. We need electricity. But what permanent sites also means is it's such a logistical headache in limiting when we have to pack it all in and pack it out like that. If we could leave it there, leave it on site, leave it set up so that it's there ready to go, and we don't have to deploy so much of the St. Vincent de Paul staff time or volunteer time to move things back and forth. If it has a kitchen facility, great. Because of course, Food for Lane County is a great partner, and we get lots of help there. And then we try to cook the food at off-site. It used to be that every one of our sites, at church or whatever, we would cook there for that particular site. COVID and other reasons, we've had to cook elsewhere, bring it in. That's fine. So we can be really flexible. So I wouldn't want folks to think, that wouldn't work because it doesn't have. I'd rather have. What do you think? And like, well, no, let's look at it. We can maybe work something out. We love proximity to downtowns just because that's where so many of our guests are. But of course, we can't count on that, and the real estate rental rates higher downtown. So I don't want to limit anybody's thinking, but close to downtown in a nice space that's got electricity and some heat and some lights that also would allow us to mitigate concerns with neighboring businesses or neighborhoods. We'll do everything we can to make it work. I don't know if that answered your question, but.
It hits it right on the head, and I'll reiterate what you said, that really you're flexible in what kind of space we're looking at. Ideally, you've got on-site storage at least for the equipment that would be used on an emergency basis, so you're not hauling it all around. Ideally, it's close to transit corridors or downtown, and it really, you'd like it to be ongoing. But I understand based on the Springfield example, that even if it's just for a couple of years, it's better than not having anything.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. And once again, Mayor Vinnis, I'll look at you and some of the innovative things that the city of Eugene has done.
Yeah, I don't know, how do I get this to go on, actually?
Head and respond, Mayor
It's
Vince,
on.
and then
Okay, good.
Maggie.
So, thank you for teeing that up. I guess the thing that I'm wondering about, for this body as we're looking at our strategic plan is to say, what we really need are permanent sites. I mean, what we really need is not just a site that's sort of available every winter, but sites that are just available so we just have fewer people scrambling around in bad weather looking for a site, because we already have those sites, right? And so I just wonder, as we think about this, I mean, we've got a huge homeless services team in the city of Eugene that's always looking at sites, right? What's out there? What could we do? And so I just wonder if there's a stepping stone, right? Is that we look at these sites that, whether they're commercial spaces or not, that could be available just in bad weather. But as we think about that as a stepping stone to more permanent sites. And I don't know what I mean by that, except recognizing that what we actually need for the city of Eugene, we have 1,000 beds, we have 2,500 people who are still looking for a place to be on any given night. And so we actually need to expand that whole system. And if we did that, we wouldn't have this crisis of a volunteer run. So because I'm thinking about our energy, right? We need to get through a crisis and create those emergency spots, but we also really need to have that be a stepping stone towards being able to fund more sustainable transitional options for folks. And it's a bigger conversation, but it's so hard to find sites that, putting energy into a site that's available for a year or two just needs to be a stepping stone to something more permanent and not just a thing in itself, in my mind,
Yeah,
in some way.
And you know this, Mayor, but when I talk about 10 or 20 years, we know that just providing some basic housing right away at the different levels for the folks who need it will keep them from getting worse to the really expensive, really hard to deal with categories. And instead, we let everyone get to that point, and then that's what we end up dealing with.
Right, right. So I'm so grateful to Egan. You just save lives every year, and I'm so grateful to those volunteers and to what you do. And I'm just sort of desperate for how do we make this be a stepping stone to a more robust response. Support you in that work, and then see the next step. And I don't know what the answer is. I used to have this idea when I first took office that we have a lot of empty retail space. We had empty restaurant space, and could we have a deal that we would have a sort of permanent Egan in all of those, where you have 10 people per site or 12 people per site in some of these sites that are, they're on the market, but they're not moving. There's sort of no interest, I think, because the liability and the risk is so high, and it's hard to manage that many multiple sites. But and we don't really have warehouse space anymore in this that's available. So I'm not exactly sure what the options are in terms of finding that space unless we're able to sort of gradually build space.
Maggie?
I just wanted to speak to your comment about Florence, and I think if you could even think about, you have a wonderful affordable income housing project there, and I shop at Vinnie's all the time. But I think with your expertise, every year, our cold weather shelter, it's all volunteers, and they kind of don't know what to do next. And so if there's some way that you could liaise with the people over there, I think it might be helpful.
I appreciate that, and like I said, we try to help in some ways, but I will take your comment as a challenge to talk more directly with them.
Appreciate it.
Okay.
Sheila?
Yeah, this is probably more a comment question. Is there any opportunity for jurisdictions to partner with emergency management? So many of these issues are climate and disaster related, to share in the funding and resources that come along with emergency management?
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I missed an important point that especially with this new funding and the flexibility, St. Vincent de Paul would love and wants to have a more direct seat at the emergency management table in our community so that we can be more nimble and ready to say, we got the emergency shelter for the in-house right here. Because those discussions happen, but I think the ice storm raised some concerns and awarenesses around that a lot of the community thinks, oh, we need an emergency shelter. Oh, but that's just for those people who have houses. We don't want to help, So there's still that we have to deal with all the time, right? And like, we're not going to we're just here to help people, right? We want to be at that table to say, we're here, what can we do? We're going to take this on. So yes, there can be, and we hope will be more direct connection with the emergency management discussions.
Is it just on? Oh, okay, good. I'm like, all the buttons. So I actually have 3 questions. When you were discussing the low barrier potential for the warming centers and cooling centers, what about individuals with their pets? What are we doing to ensure that people aren't being separated? Because I know oftentimes that folks won't go into shelter services if they have pets.
Animals are welcome at Egan Warming Centers and at the cooling center, whatever we have.
Okay.
Animals are welcome.
What effort has been put into engaging with the different faith communities to see about utilizing their space and or their volunteers?
I sent a mailing out to everybody I could find a couple summers ago, and a lot of them came back because they're just not open anymore. And we had a pretty small response, inviting them to an information luncheon just to talk about it. This is what Egan is, this is how you can help, even if you don't want to be a full shelter. There's more direct outreach and nudging that we could do, but it's a lot of efforts for not a lot of in response for it. And it's mostly worked sort of word of mouth and the connections that the leaders of these institutions have in each other, with each other. And I think nationally and locally, it's all kind of shifting more toward a staffed, more government-run. Long way of saying it's tough. There is more we can do, but we've kind of reached some dead ends for some of that.
And then my final question regarding staffing of these centers. I know it's primarily been done with volunteers, and as you have an aging demographic, that makes it more and more difficult, especially as things like the pandemic happen. Have we thought about pursuing different funding avenues to partner with even potentially other shelter providers that tend to have the training and the expertise and the knowledge available to help, to pay for staffing, or even, a partial stipend or something along those lines to encourage those agencies to partner with Egan Warming Centers to make sure that that's available and that we're never going to not have it open because we are lacking in the staffing to keep it there.
Yeah, I would love to talk more if you have ideas for maybe how we can do that, who maybe could help with that. I guess my top of mind response is everyone's so busy and they've got their own things they have to deal with, and they can help if they can in some ways, but that doesn't mean that they can stop what they're doing already to help people and move over to do that. It's not a great answer, but I think of our youth issues, which is tough. Our friends at Looking Glass opened the Peer Shelter, which is wonderful. The last couple of years, we actually did not open our youth shelter last year for the first time because they have their all night, every night. We're actually, working with them in partnership. We're going to open our youth shelter again this year just because they're popular and they're full. And we don't want to take a chance that some night they're going to be too full because they only have a finite number of beds. So everybody's already doing too much. And yes, we'll take their help and we'd love to have more partners. It's a challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, for your presentation. And hopefully, we will all consider Tim's request.
Can I make
From-
one more
Yes, you may.
plug? We are scheduling our new volunteer orientations for the year, and we haven't loaded them all on our website yet, but will soon. But October 24th, just next week, we have our first one for the year. So we've got a series of Zoom and in-person orientations on the calendar for October through January. And it's a really fascinating, great 90 minutes. Even if you never end up volunteering, you'll learn a lot about EGAN and about trauma-informed care and about what we do. So check out our website next week. Thank you.
So much. Josh.
Heard my name. Is it on me?
Yes.
Hey, y'all. Sorry I'm a little bit late. Great conversation so far from what I heard. Is it okay for me to share my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So I am tasked with kind of doing a little bit of a level set, trying to do 2 days worth of presentation in 30 minutes. It can happen, you know. Surely some things will be missed, but Joe, I'm going to just do a recap of our system design clinic and kind of get right into it because I do have a decent amount of slides that I want to cover in a short time and to allow for some questions with the understanding that we will have some future opportunities to dive a little bit deeper. So again, I'm Josh Johnson, he, him, his pronouns, identifies Black African American. I'm a senior TA specialist with the National Alliance to End Homelessness. We are a nonprofit organization focused on ending homelessness with our goal of leading with love and equity, inspiring faith, and bringing people home. We address homelessness in 3 ways: advocacy, training and technical assistance, and through research and data analysis. We elevate the folks with lived experience and utilize strategic communication to meet the goal of ending homelessness in our country. This is our agenda, really more from day one. It's just I wanted to show this because it just how comprehensive we kind of spent with our time together. But really, to talk a little bit about what the system design clinic is. It's really focused on solutions and strategies to end homelessness. Again, from our research and our work across the country to design best practices, looking at a crisis response system, and identifying, lifting up the critical role of governance and implementing these key strategies. So my goal quickly with you all is to talk a little bit about what a effective homeless response system is, discuss some of the system performance data that we looked at, recognize some of our issues with system flow, discuss the role of the COC governance, and just to introduce some of the recommendations. We started our time with our folks specifically on day one doing what we call a homeless simulation, in which it's each group acts as like their own COC. It's really like a very simplified version of how the homeless assistance system works, right? It's decision-making, understanding the impacts of certain decisions, and it's informed by using actual data and outcomes from programs from across the country. So folks got to work together and make systemic decisions around moving people into housing and or making a decision that can impact folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness. That kind of set the stage. We also talked about what we consider an effective, equitable, and efficient system is really a system that works to house people as quickly as possible and when safe and appropriate, diverts people from entering homelessness at all. Right, and we do this by these systemic performance measures that we, you all submit to HUD from our system performance measures, but these are the things that you all should be reviewing on at least a monthly or quarterly basis to look at, are we meeting the goal of, reducing inflows into homelessness, increasing exits to permanent housing, decrease average length of time people experiencing homeless, and decrease return to homelessness. These are the data, the 4 data elements that we should know, right? Because these are the ones that are going to help us know if we're moving towards the ultimate goal of that effective and efficient system. We also have to look at each part of the system, right? A lot of times, when we don't make systemic level decision making, we'll end up with a lot of really great shiny parts, a lot of really great interventions. But if they don't work together, it doesn't work well as a system, right? So as you see, just a quick picture of these cogs, and when they work together, they actually make something happen, right? It creates a systemic response, and that's kind of what we're talking about when aligning, our interventions and approaches together. So all across all systems, we need to embrace a housing first approach, utilize diversion of housing problem solving to help people not enter the homeless system or exit quickly, rapidly identify folks who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness and connect them to crisis services and housing assistance, quick, accessible, low barrier pathways to shelter, and that really optimizes short stays in shelter, right, to help get folks connected to housing as quickly as possible, and then rapid connection in general to permanent housing options. So that means all aspects of our system, right? All aspects of our system have to work towards those common goals and embrace those philosophies in order for us to move towards this effective system. That means it all has to utilize a coordinated entry. It all has to use data decision making to improve and to find the gaps, and utilize an equity lens to ensure we're not creating any disparate impact with the services that we provide. Now, I'm talking about a lot of things really quickly, and on our 2 days, we really went into each of these interventions with a lot more detail. But as you know, for the sake of time, I'm not going to do it. But I do know that nationally that there is a push against housing first for a lot of different reasons, and so I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about kind of what it is and what it isn't. It's a philosophical approach, not a program. It's supposed to be flexible in nature, really focused on getting people in housing quickly, but it's not all housing only, right? And I think that's where we kind of lose it. It has to have culturally responsive supportive services that is developed to the individual household. And it's really it's predicated on the belief in people and the understanding that people will do best when they're not in a crisis fight, flight, or freeze mode. So it also talks about why do we talk about it as the Alliance, because it's decades of evidence have shown how it works, right? And even looking at the data now, we're housing more people than ever, even though homelessness is increasing because of external factors, not necessarily predicated on the homeless system itself, right? Like it's as you think about, I use the analogy of a hospital. Hospital can't determine how many people are going to get sick in the community. They can only serve the people who are in their system, right? And so similar to the homeless system, we know how to serve people in our system, and evidence is supported. And when done with fidelity, it increases housing stability, increases increases the use of outpatient care, save communities money through multiple avenues, reduces homelessness more than historical programs that mandate any type of treatment. But it works best when we preserve and build affordable housing. We know that housing costs impact homelessness, right? Programs are fully funded and can employ and retain staff needed. We know that staffing crisis is another issue within the homeless system. And then clients can opt into available, adequate, and tailored services, right? That's when it works best. But again, the supportive services is that piece that we highlight as the crucial component to the housing first approach. All right, so we asked the question about how, to the community. This is we had a series of these, but do we believe that folks are ready for housing? And as you see, there's there's more spread out than we saw when we asked, do the community understand housing first? Do we employ a housing first philosophy? You see that there's some folks who are like, people aren't ready, and right, that's a belief thing that we'll have to have more conversations as a community, right? So moving on to emergency crisis housing crisis, and what we mean by that, right? We mean any type of emergency shelter, right? Any type of place that people go when they need a place to go. I know we have alternative shelters in the community. This includes them as well, right? It has to be low barrier, it has to have immediate access to crisis housing, it has to be focused on exiting households to housing quickly, because if we don't, it creates a bottleneck. And I know historically shelters have been more used in like the hostile-like environment. It kind of really meets the basic needs, but in order to really ensure that we have an effective system, we have to move towards the right, and not the right only, right? We're still going to provide the life-saving services. We're going to also provide folks with what they need, a bed, right? But we're also going to work on how resolving their housing crisis, right? Because that frees up the bed so we can have more system flow and allow for more folks who are experiencing shelter to go into the already not enough shelter beds that we have. So that's it. We have to make sure that we're using the 5 keys, what we consider the 5 keys of effective emergency shelter. This is what we got after doing some deep analysis around some of the high performing shelters across the country, and found these core components, which is the belief in a housing first approach, utilizing safe and appropriate diversion and housing problem solving, immediate and low barrier access, and really be housing focused with rapid exit services and utilizing data to kind of measure how they go. Then we talked about like rapid housing. What is it? The three components of finding housing, paying for housing, and staying in housing. We looked at the data, right? We saw that even though there's not a whole lot of rapid housing in the community, there's really good numbers. With we already know that there's a tight housing market, but with this intervention, there has been some levels of success for singles and families utilizing it. I would just mention that length of stay is a little high, but again, the outcomes are really good, and is better than the the benchmarks set by our rapid housing standards. And then we started talking a little bit about like the community. This might be data that you all are familiar with, just understanding how it's growing and how it's, there's 136 households, families experiencing homelessness, and 2,635 in single adult households experiencing homelessness within the community. We talked about just like the total exits, like what are some of the total exits in the community? So like as a community, we're about 19% exits to permanent housing of the folks who exit our system, right? Talk about the total exits. This looks at a little bit of a different data source, but just over time, our total exits in our community to some type of permanent housing coming from emergency shelter, TH, RH, and PSH. And you can see 2021, we had a lot more resources to assist households. So we did see an increase, right, in folks leaving to permanent housing. Then we talked a little bit about coordinated entry, and we have this coordinated entry list. We're assessing or putting folks on a house on average about 1,291 on a list monthly, but only like 15 folks are being referred to rapid housing and PSH, right? So like where are all the other folks going to get out of homelessness? Like what other resources are being leveraged? Then we analyzed a little bit about like where from your housing inventory count, how it's broken down by single adults and family. As you see, 5% of the allocation for single adults goes towards rapid housing. Then you see PSH, you see emergency shelter, transitional housing. Transitional housing is 7%, and then a little bit larger, specifically rapid housing for families. You can see that here. And I'll make sure you all have access to this. And this is not including the 287 alternative shelter beds. Then we talked about like just an increase in folks experiencing homelessness for the first time, meaning folks who have not been in the homeless system for at least 2 years who are touching the system. There could be a lot more disaggregation to see like who are these folks, where they're coming from, have they ever been in the system ever, right? But just this number is just an indicator of like you have folks coming into homelessness for the first time and it's growing, right? Again, that's not a homeless system problem. That's just understanding that is the need is growing. And how do we ensure we look at our how we're allocating and making decisions to just know and understand that. Just really quick, our day one goals were to understand the role of emergency effective, efficient homeless response system. How do we begin to right size? I'm going to talk about that in a couple slides. Think about the importance of the all funded interventions align with best practices, and then utilize a racial equity lens in all the work we do. On day two, we really started talking about kind of what the role of a COC is, and it's really designed from the McKinney-Vento Act that created the statutory framework that is really designed to promote community-wide buy-in and strategic use of resources to address homelessness, to really look at and gather and improve data, to really improve coordination of resources that are all around directly or indirectly for folks experiencing homelessness. And then it's flexible enough where communities should develop what makes the most sense for them. That's why there's not overly prescribed by HUD, because it's also supposed to meet those goals, right? It's supposed to allow for there to be a coordinated effort of addressing homelessness within the community. That's where, and then you see the COC program goes through the COC, how much you all get. This is all stuff that you all know. But it has, sometimes what communities get lost is like what actually is the role of the COC board. And a lot of times it gets reduced to COC and ESG funded programs, but it's really all stakeholders in the community. How do we work collaboratively? It's a community planning to organize and deliver housing and services to meet the specific needs of people who are experiencing homelessness and as they move to stable housing and maximize self-sufficiency. And so you see on the left, some of your great words of how, you believe the role of the PHB and the community is really to create strategic planning, bring people together, utilize best practices. So you guys are moving to, and already having these conversations and just really helping us understand what the role is, right? And how do you all make decisions to align and address homelessness within Lane County, right? As the system leaders. And so like a part of that is right-sizing your system, using data, using stakeholder feedback, funding allocations to really look at what's happening, what's working, what do we need more of, what do we need to do better to adequately address homelessness. So I just another one, just a breakdown. This is single and families all together. Looking at how we have things broken down. One of the largest vehicles of moving people out of homelessness is rapid rehousing, right? And we don't have enough specifically for single adults in the community. And so just like looking at our pie and seeing like how do we slice it, right? Of course, ultimately we want to ask for more, right? We want to ask for a bigger pie, but how do we slice it to ensure that we're meeting, the needs of folks in our community? And do we have the right things in place, right? So again, making those investments without necessarily thinking about how it is coordinated. And I talked about those cogs, but this is just another way to frame it. You'll have a lot of really good interventions, but if they're not working together, if they're not right sized, if it doesn't necessarily meet the needs specifically of your community, then there's not going to be flow. There's not going to be movement. So we have to have interventions that work together, right? We have to have like cars that have interventions that move in a coordinated effort. I keep looking at the time. So I did want to stop right there and just say really quick, I want to celebrate the wins too. Like you guys have some really good things happening. A lot of times when we do these presentations, we highlight specifically like all like the pain points and some areas of improvement, but there's also some wins. You with the emergency housing vouchers, you used 100% success rate. You've done some really great jobs of expanding crisis beds. Met the goals of the All Initiative, meeting the housing milestone. You have some very, very strong grassroots organizations who are really committed to meeting the needs of folks experiencing unsheltered homelessness. You've retooled your coordinated entry system. You have some really great data, like access to data that's publicly available that not every community has. So you have some really good things working. And with that being said, so with everything we analyzed, again, we did surveys for folks with lived experience, surveys for general community, surveys for folks, leadership in the community. And we looked at policies and procedures from the COC, had numerous conversations with folks. I got to listen in on some of the work that Brittany Manzo is doing for the strategic plan. And that's kind of how this is going to feed right into the work that she's doing, and to really look at kind of what some big picture recommendations that we're recommending for the community. And again, I feel like I went over a lot of information really fast. I'm hoping that Kate has and can send a larger PowerPoint to you all to be able to look at and digest a little bit more. But what I covered was kind of like the framing of kind of what some of the basis of our recommendations. So we talked about strengthening relationship and decision making, foster stronger collaboration between the cities, right, and the continuum of care to ensure that is a unified, data informed decision making across all levels, and we're all working towards the same thing, right? We have to work collaboratively to right size and align, not only our system but the messaging of what we're doing, what we're trying to do, and our overarching goals. We have to create system-wide buy-in, build consensus and alignment through partnerships with cross-system and upstream stakeholders, initiate educational, collaborative, inclusive efforts, inviting all community partners to participate, and really aimed that process at like healing, right? I did, here there's just been some things that has happened, maybe directly, indirectly, or things that's been said that has caused harm, that really will impact the ability for some folks to maybe engage collectively. And so we have to have an honest conversation in order to move forward. So, but I think that has to happen before we have some actual, unified movement. Develop some type of funding collaborative. All funding that's coming to your community that impacts homelessness should come through some collaborative approach, right? There shouldn't be pockets of money going to this organization, or this community is making this decision on funding, and they're not aligned, right? We talk about those cars where if we're all as a community, no matter what your role is in the community, and you're making the funding decision, it impacts the community as a whole. And that has to ensure including adequate funding for staff. We have to expand permanent housing solutions, specifically for single adults, right? That includes maybe rapid housing, some joint THRH investment as we're thinking about crisis housing and interventions to move people on. And then also looking for place opportunities to reallocate to high performing housing providers under that same umbrella. So it's all included with investing and increasing, but also with right sizing and maybe reallocating to ensure effectiveness. Enhancing move-on strategy specifically for supportive housing. As you saw, supportive housing is about 43%. I didn't share the data, but there's folks exiting out of PSH, not a huge number, but exiting, and not all, and a small number of those folks are moving into permanent housing. So how do we ensure that folks who are leaving or moving on or ready to move on from PSH are able to do so in a streamlined a way that ensures that they have wraparound needs and their housing is stabilized or not jeopardized, even though their needs have decreased by stabilizing in PSH for a period of time. And then 6 to 9, ensuring fidelity to evidence-based practices and transparency. We want to track and define and ensure transparency with adherence to best practices through all interventions, and really ensure that there is accountability there, and it's a shared accountability, and it's a transparent accountability, and to make sure that we're all doing the things that we know that works to end and address homelessness. I think another piece of that is educating and involving the community, promote community education on homelessness in general, what causes it. That includes housing first, because again, there's a lot of narratives out there. Define language utilized within the homeless response system. And then ensure the voices of folks with lived experience are heard and involved in all the decision-making happening. You want to ensure that there's a comprehensive annual training schedule and monitoring plan, and establish a community-wide housing problem solving. This is more of an upstream intervention. I know that there's a conversation around a prevention kind of prevention framework that's already kind of being worked on. This could be in partnership with that, just training folks on housing problem solving to try to address some of that first-time homelessness number that we saw in those data shared. All right.
Josh, we are going to let you breathe.
I was sneaking in.
What we weren't able
I was
to tell
sneaking breaths in.
Is that we voted to have a all-member meeting next month so that we can take a deep dive into your information, because we knew we didn't have enough time on the agenda today. So I want to thank you and to let you know that if you ever decide to get out of this business, you could probably be a really great auctioneer. I've never seen anybody talk so fast yet so clear.
I will put that down as a consideration.
So as a wrap up, because I know everybody wants to go, and a thank you, Josh, and James is going to reach out. Hopefully, either you or somebody from your team will be able to meet with us next month when we're able to dedicate that whole meeting to this information. And I do want to ask the Poverty and Homelessness Board, now that we have the information, if you had questions from what Josh spoke about today, or when you get the PowerPoint. I never really ask you guys to do homework, but I am asking you to do your homework, to read that and bring back some questions, or send questions to James so that we can get that information answered and make sure that we're able to have a robust conversation next month when we all meet. And then as the last wrap up, I do want to say thank you to St. Vincent de Paul for the years of work with the Vet Lift program and your continued support of vets, even though you won't be renewing the vet lift application. And I also want to thank Tim for coming in and letting us know about the needs of the warming center and the emergency services, and that we do keep that in mind as we're talking about the strategic plan, and not only in 3 years, but as Tim says, we kind of have some short-term things that we need to take a look at and figure out how we can support St. Vincent de Paul in their efforts, because we don't, and we made a commitment multiple years ago that we don't want to sit in a meeting 6 weeks before it's time to do a plan for emergency shelter and then talk about what we need. So I thank you for letting us know now what we're going to need moving forward into the next year so that we can be proactive on that. Yes. And with that, we went 2 minutes over, so I apologize for that, but thank you all, and the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.